Okay, James Corbett, all the way from Japan here in Amsterdam.
Yes.
How do you feel being here?
It's absolutely wonderful. I don't have any time to see anything.
No time.
No, I wish I did, but it's been a whirlwind trip. So I was mostly in Groningen, way in the north of the country. It was surprisingly warm and pleasant, and the people were surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, but were warm and pleasant. So it's been a great trip so far, and had some excellent talks and some great responses. And it's amazing for me, who spends all of my time online reading words on a screen, to actually be meeting these people and shaking their hands and seeing there are real human beings behind all of this. So it's really been a really positive experience.
So you live in what part of Japan?
It's Western Japan. It's a little city called Okayama that no one's ever heard of. So Osaka is the closest thing that most people would know.
So you do know Central Station in Tokyo?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Do you think it looks like it or not? Because this
Yes,
one
it
was
does.
supposed to be there
Wow.
first, and
Yeah.
the Kyoto one is supposed to be the replica.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it does look like it. I never noticed that. That's very cool.
Yeah, well, I was in Japan a few times, and I saw that the people are a little bit different from here.
Yes.
I would say that if you look at the New World Order, maybe the New World Order, the people who run it, or would want to run it, would want people globally to be like the Japanese.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
There are definitely aspects of Japanese culture that are good for people who want to be in control, because the Japanese culture is generally pliable and controllable. There's a real importance placed on group consensus and group harmony, which creates a very safe environment. It's the safest country on the planet that I've ever been to, and very nice in many ways. People are polite, and there's not a lot of conflict on the surface at any rate, which has its good aspects. It also has its kind of Twilight Zone scary aspects when you think about the kind of conformity that comes with that. So I think that's a lot of imperial conditioning that's held over into the modern era, because basically Japan never really changed out of its imperial feudal structure. It's now just the corporations are the old feudal lords. So it's basically retained that shape, and it's done so very well, I think, because of the ethnic homogeneity of the country, 98% Japanese. It's been able to maintain that cultural and sort of social harmony for a long time. There are signs that's changing, but I think you're right. From the perspective of people who want to be in control, it's a very... it's an interesting system to emulate. I think there are good aspects to it, but there are obviously negative aspects.
Because what I was thinking was, there's this big thing in Japan about the Japanese. Here in Holland we have a multicultural society.
Yes.
What do you think, will this ever occur in Japan?
I think it will, but it will not occur easily or quickly. The Japanese are very reticent about this. There's been talk from Abe, Prime Minister of the country, about opening up immigration and allowing in more skilled workers and things, which for a country that has been isolated for thousands of years is a big step, and one that isn't taken easily or lightly. So I think it's a process that's going to start being foisted on the Japanese people, whether they like it or not. Again, there are positive aspects to that, but it's clearly an attempt to engineer a society. There are economic reasons that are given for that, but I think that, again, from the perspective of control, perhaps there are other reasons why that would be attempted.
Because over here as well, there was this tradition of St. Nicholas.
Right.
As his helper is called Zwarte Piet, Black Pete. And for the last few months, or maybe 1 year, there's been a lot of problems surrounding that. Do you think something like that sort of a division could also happen in Japan, where the society would be divided into two, pro and against?
Well, I mean, in certain ways, the society is divided already along certain things, but it's not ethnically, basically. There's consensus about the discrimination against Koreans and others in Japan, so there aren't really two sides to that story, unless you count the Koreans, which the Japanese don't. So yes, I mean, there are divisions that can be played on within society, and I think they could be amplified depending on the type of people who are brought into the country. Immigration and things could change that dynamic in a way. I think of some of the big key issues for Japan in the 21st century, like energy security, the nuclear question. There are large parts of the population against it. There are large parts of the population that are for the idea of nuclear energy, and that's a potential divisive issue that could have a serious effect on the development of Japan in the rest of the century. So those types of issues, how will they be affected by all of these other things that are taking place geopolitically and economically? Again, there's going to be significant changes happening in the next couple of decades, but what those changes will be or what shape they'll take, I couldn't even begin to speculate.
Then about the information war, you just mentioned downstairs there that the first thing we need to do is to get information out. What do you think is the next step? So what if information is out? What should we do next? Because we see demonstrations, we see activism, of which I think mostly it's not useful.
Yeah.
What do you think is useful as a next step?
Okay, well, first I agree, generally speaking, political activism is a sort of failed paradigm at this point because it hasn't accomplished anything fundamental. Again, I think the fundamental part of all of this isn't specifically about what slave master is ruling over people. It's getting rid of the slave master itself. And that's a position that a lot of people are reluctant to actually eliminate psychologically. More so than anything, because it is convenient to be able to just live your life and be told what to do to some extent and just live along certain prescribed realities. So how do we break out of that? And what's the best way to do that? Again, I think that has to come from a number of different perspectives, but I would say that it really is the fundamental part of this is understanding. I really do believe that that's the important point of it, because so much of this is about our participation in certain systems, like the monetary system, our participation by using these euro banknotes that are printed by the ECB out of nothing and all of that craziness. Again, a greater awareness of that system and who it benefits and who it ends up hurting and how we can do things differently is genuine knowledge that could genuinely change the structure of society, not just the slave master, but actually change the structure. And so I think there are certain pieces of information that are absolutely vital to changing things, more so than any boots on the ground, placards in the air, waving your fist, asking for change from political overlords. It's about mentality. So I know that's not a satisfying answer, because a lot of people really do want some sort of battle in some sense. That's the way we analogize that, and that's the way we've been trained to think about it. But I think the battle is all in our mind. I really do think in a key sense it's in our mind. At a certain point, a public that's awake and active and starting communities of barter and alternative currencies and things is going to be aggressed upon by the control structure, clearly. But we're not anywhere near that point yet. And when that happens, I really believe that's actually the downfall of the control structure, because when you make a tyrant act like a tyrant is when the tyrant actually falls.
Then with the information that is getting out, we had a small riot some time ago here in Holland. There was a model who went on Twitter, and the thing that she tweeted was, Ebola, is it a coincidence or was this planned? There was this mini riot that everybody sort of fell over her, saying, how could you say something like that? People are not allowed to question anymore. Do you think there will be even more censorship on information in the future?
Yes, no, maybe so. In what respects? What things will be censored? What things will be allowed? I mean, look at the way that media develops in different places. For example, Russian-controlled media is excellent for telling you about corruption in America, but somehow it doesn't tell you so much about corruption in Russia, etc. So I think there's always going to be an outlet, but it's a question of what will be allowed and what won't, and in what ways will that be censored. I think what you point to is an interesting facet of the internet, which is the enabling of the herd mentality and the sort of the vigilante mentality, which can create things like people storming against someone. How dare you say that about Ebola or whatever? It can also create things in the opposite direction, which I guess could be good, sort of, vigilante justice against the New World Order or something of that sort. But I think that's, again, a failed paradigm, because ultimately I think they know how to deal with a lot of that type of herd mentality, base level picketing or pitchforks or whatever it is kind of mentality. I think the thing that can't be resisted is people actually just interacting with each other, creating communities. That can be accomplished with the help of things like the internet. It has to also, of course, take place in real life. It has to be a multifaceted approach. It has to avoid herd mentality. So I think we have to rise above the sort of baser instincts that are brought out by the internet. And it's an open question whether we can do that. I'm not saying definitively that's going to be possible.
Then I wrote you an email. I was wondering if you had seen any of our productions.
I saw some of your interviews at Bilderberg.
Okay.
And I'm sure I saw a couple of other interviews, obviously in English. I don't speak Dutch. But yes, I have seen you.
Anything that you think might be worth talking about here now?
Well, I mean, on the issue of Bilderberg and the issue of control, I think that's interesting. And I would actually be interested in getting your take about what you thought about attending Bilderberg. Was it productive? Was it something that you... I mean, in what way did that accomplish what you're attempting to do with We Are Change?
It was strange because it was more of a festival at Watford, so that was a bit strange. I think other Bilderbergs were always a bit hush-hush, and with this one it was almost blown up as a festival. The venue where the Bilderberg actually took place was very far away from where the so-called festival was.
Right.
So we never saw any Bilderbergers. And from footage that I see of other Bilderbergs, like the last one where this Dutch parliamentary guy came out, die Dirk Samsel, that is different.
Yeah,
so on the one hand it looked like, hey, something is really changing, and on the other hand it seemed like it was further away than ever.
But Michael Meacher on national TV in Britain, it was talked about on BBC. I mean, there is something significant to that. It's not saying that's the be-all and end-all, but I mean, I think it's an interesting mixture of, well, there are more people than ever before knowing about it, but they're further away from ever before.
And then again, when we came back, we made our productions from that Bilderberg, and we noticed that not many people watched it. It's only like we had a film of was it David Icke? It was like 1,000 views.
Right.
We had Alex Jones. He's like 150 views.
Yeah.
So there's a few question marks that we put with this Bilderberg, where we go like, how does this work? We don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's a good question, and it raises questions about the utility or futility of continuing to do those types of operations at Bilderberg. I think it is important that people know more and more about Bilderberg, but as I tried to stress in my coverage of it this past year, I think we have to stress that this is only one conference of a much larger network that's taking place all throughout the year, and not necessarily in person. I mean, telephones exist, at the very least, right? I mean, these types of things happen all the time. As a focal point for us to at least reflect on that, maybe it can be kind of I don't want to say New World Order holiday, but you know what I mean? Like the way that we think about giving and whatever at Christmas, but we maintain that spirit in our heart the year round. When we think about these networks of elite that are operating against our interests at Bilderberg, but of course it's happening all year round. If we can accomplish that, I mean, that's something. But again, it's a question of if we are physically far away, what can we actually accomplish with this?
Exactly. Oh, when we meet, I should say like Hajime Mashite.
Oh, wow, very nice. Hajime Mashite. James desu. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu.
Yoroshiku. Yeah, and I was wondering, I heard this the podcast of 2010.
Yes.
In which some Australian guy interviews you.
Yes.
Yeah. You said
which Australian guy?
I don't know. It was the podcast in which you talk about yourself. So it was an interview with you.
Okay. Yeah.
And in 2010 you say, well, I do a full-time job as an English teacher in elementary school and secondary school.
Yes.
Is that still the case?
No.
No.
Up until 2011, I was doing that. In 2011, I was able to take the website full-time. With the help of global research and Boiling Frogs and my subscribers and donations and DVD sales, I went full-time. Okay. And at this point, it's mostly subscriber-driven and donation-driven and DVD-driven. But yes, I'm doing it full-time.
So that sounds hopeful.
Yes, I think it is. Honestly, I mean, I think, if nothing else, what I've been able to do is some sort of sign that there is some genuine phenomenon happening. And I guess anyone out there watching this wouldn't know because they don't know it from the outside. But for me, I know I'm just a regular Joe who just started a website, and I'm now doing this. And so it really can. I mean, genuinely can happen. That's an incredible thing, and anyone who's listening or watching to this should reflect on that, because, again, you're not just in the audience anymore. We have this tool, let's use it, and you never know what's going to happen.
Any more advice for us? Because we get no money from this. We only lose money.
What's money? Who needs money? You need money to live in this environment, but let's change that. And advice, I would just say keep doing what you're doing. Honestly, if it's not coming from a place of passion, then it's not coming from a real place, and people will see that. But it obviously is coming from passion. So that's going to connect with some people. And you never know what seeds you're planting are going to evolve in what ways. I've met people who've had some crazy stories about how they encountered me, and now they're doing other things and starting Bitcoin meetups in Korea and things, and all sorts of stuff going on all over the world. I have no idea what's happening. So just continue doing what you're doing, make it about your passion, and people will follow.
It's great to hear.
Awesome. Thank you
James
so much.
Corbett, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For everything.
All right.
Not just for this interview, but for all the work you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.